Okay, so we are now on to the second part of our lecture, Science of Biology, trying to look at what is biology, what makes something alive, how do we organize things, and then how do we go about this process of biology, the study or the field of biology. So to do this, we use a lot of reasoning. We use a lot of experiments, testing, scientific method. We'll discuss these things in a little bit here. But science is based in facts. It's based in information and evidence and what can we prove and what can we conclude from the evidence at hand. So it's a very factual based type of discipline. So to do this, to gain those facts, we often use different reasoning methods. So we use what we call inductive and deductive reasoning. So we want to look at the difference here and explore what are these. So let me get a little box here where we can talk about it and kind of put in some information. All right, so inductive reasoning. In inductive reasoning, what we do is we make a broad, sorry about the spelling here, broad generalization of something, but we're making this generalization from observations. Okay, so I observed this, I saw this event happen, and trying to draw a conclusion from this. So that's the idea behind inductive reasoning. Broad generalization from a specific observation. Data equals conclusions. Now, you may say, well, you don't have enough data. Okay, get that. I can draw a temporary conclusion, but yeah, I want to accumulate more data. In order to accumulate data, you need to be able to do a study. Using a specific research method to then be able to get your data. And a big thing, whenever we're doing this to try to collect data, it better be repeatable. You better be able to redo that experiment over and over and over and over, have somebody else do it. So take some good notes. What is your method? What is your scientific method to get your data, to be able to draw your conclusions, to come up with an idea? So inductive reasoning. Said broad generalizations. Oh, I'm sorry, this should be from, not from. From observations that you make. So now we need to take a look at deductive reasoning. With deductive reasoning, it's sometimes it's referred to as a top-down logic. So deductive reasoning is you have a conclusion that is based on the idea or the premise that is assumed to be true. So this top-down logic. So theory of gravity. You take a pencil, and I want you guys to pick up a pencil right now and drop it. Because of the theory of gravity, the deductive reasoning is it's going to fall to the floor. Do the same thing with your book, with your notes, with your phone, with whatever you have at hand. Because theory of gravity is well accepted, we assume it's always going to work. We assume, yeah, I drop something, it's going to fall to the floor. So your premise is that it's going to work in the same fashion every single time. So deductive being top down, inductive sometimes is considered bottom up. The reasoning goes in the other direction, that you have data and then you're trying to draw that conclusion. So as I mentioned a few minutes ago, to get these ideas, to formulate these concepts, we need to walk through the scientific method. This has a process. This has a series of events that you have to follow in order for it to be valid. So if you can't repeat an experiment, it loses a lot of validity and credibility within the scientific community. This is where we get the difference between fact and belief. Well, I believe this baseball team is the best in the major leagues, or this football team is the best in the NFL. Do I have evidence and facts to back it up? If you don't have the evidence and the facts, it doesn't mean your belief is wrong. It just means that it's not a science or fact-based belief system. So again, we'll get into that later in the semester, and there can be some challenges for everybody in here who's a biologist when you confront, or I don't want to say confront, that sounds confrontational, when you have discussions with people who are not using facts to support their belief system. They are passionate about that belief system, and that's fantastic. But do you want to be passionate about something that's fact-based or just belief-based? Sometimes it's both. Science, we lean towards fact-based. So we'll make sure we get into this again later in the semester. So look at the scientific method. Make sure you are comfortable with that. Let me go back to my red pen. I'm going to actually increase the thickness of the size of my dot. Oh, so that way, that didn't do it. Let's get the dot bigger. There it is. Bigger dot. All right, so that way you guys know this is an important thing for anybody going into any area of science. Understand this method. Be able to repeat this process. If you don't know the scientific method, it's not going to be easy to be a scientist. All right, so we start with an observation. Something you witnessed, you experienced, some kind of event. Then you make a question. This is called a hypothesis, and you should have lots of hypotheses based on your question from your observation. You then design an experiment. You run your experiment, you collect data, and then the data either says, awesome, you got it figured out, or you're rejecting these things. And then you start this process all over again. Some of you guys are going to head to medical school. This is how you deal with your patient's illness. Observation, formulate a question, hypothesis, experiment. Do you now have a conclusion? All right, so let's walk through a real life scenario that odds are all of us have or will deal with at some point. The car won't start. So go out there and getting ready for work, you're getting ready to go out, you're getting ready to do whatever. And there's your observation. Car won't start. Worked the other day, worked last night or this morning. There's your observation, your car won't start. So now you have to ask a question or formulate a hypothesis. So one hypothesis could be, I have a dead battery. That's why my car won't start. But consider how many other hypotheses you could form. My starter's bad, my spark plugs are bad, my ignition switch is bad. How many different things could you develop here? But we're going to focus on just this single hypothesis of a bad battery. Somebody else should be testing all these other hypotheses. That's how science works. You don't do it alone. You do things in teams. So I want to test my hypothesis about my battery. So in order to do that, I need to design and run an experiment. Okay, how can I test my battery? Got a voltage meter. Plug that in. That's one experiment to test that hypothesis. I can try to get a jump from somebody else. That's another experiment to test my hypothesis. I can just try turning the lights on or the radio or something else. Do I have power to the vehicle? All of those experiments will test that single hypothesis. And that's what you want to do, is have multiple experiments to test a single hypothesis. While you're testing your hypothesis, running your experiments, you're going to be collecting data. The data will say your battery's dead or your battery works. That's data. That's information. That's what we need to draw that conclusion, to use that reasoning to come up with, in this case, a solution to our problem. You guys are problem solving daily. You're walking through the scientific method without even realizing it. Why won't my computer work? Why won't my phone work? Why is my internet out? All those things are solved through the scientific method. You problem solve. That is one of the greatest skill sets you need to learn throughout this course, is how to problem solve. If you can do that, you're going to be far more successful than somebody who gets 100 on an exam but cannot problem solve. All right, so I'm going to continue to try to build that skill. You'll use that skill every time you come into lab, every time you guys do something in science. You're going to be problem solving and using scientific method. So now here's a reality. Most of the time our data doesn't support the hypothesis. It's not the battery. So I have options here. My data doesn't support my hypothesis. I can redesign my experiment and rerun it. I'm going to try a different one, and a different one, and a different one. And you keep running that loop until you get data that hopefully supports a hypothesis. But depending on the nature of your experiment, you might not have the ability, the resources, or the time to redesign the experiment and rerun. So then you switch over to, can I just simply redesign my hypothesis? Okay, I have data. I need a hypothesis that the data works with. So I'm going to redesign the hypothesis. But either way, whichever route you go, redesign the experiment and rerun, or redesign your hypothesis, you need to retest it. And you need to do it again and again and again and again and again. Notice the stressing of again and again and again. And then once you have a significant amount of data to support your hypothesis, you've tested this and tested this and tested this, your hypothesis can move to the status that we call a theory. So here's a huge issue that I want to red star, and you guys have to get this into your heads and explain it to other people as well. When you hear the word theory in science, it means, here's our definition, a plausible or scientifically acceptable general principle or body of principles offered to explain phenomena. Theory in science means facts. It has facts to support it. It has data. It has information, evidence that tell us this is not a guess. General common usage of the word theory, it's a guess. What's your theory about the murder? What's your theory about this? It's a guess. In science, no. When we say it's a theory, we can base our lives off of it. So ask somebody, oh, theory's a guess. So when you go to the doctor and they use a thing called the germ theory to determine that you have a bacterial infection, is that just a guess? No, it's facts. So this is a huge challenge. Most of the public is ignorant about the term theory, and they don't understand what theory means in science. They think every scientific theory is a guess. That was just what you think. No, it's supported by data and facts and experiments, and all these things continue to support this idea. So when we get into the theory of evolution, you'll have people say, oh, it's just a theory. It doesn't really count because they don't really know. It's just a guess. No, there are lines and lines and lines of evidence that support evolution. Evolution, the theory of evolution, supports the germ theory. So if you trust your doctor and don't believe in evolution, you really don't understand science and the word theory. So we'll talk more about this as we move into our next lecture. The next part, that'll be part 3 for the science of biology.